These days, a lot of folks are wondering especially when it comes to Gen Z. Those born from around 1997 onward are young people today struggling more with mental health than previous generations. Or is this just a narrative shaped by the media and social platforms? When we talk about stages of human development, we all move through childhood, adolescence, and eventually into early adulthood. Right now, Gen Z is largely in that early adulthood phase. Each of these life stages comes with its own unique set of challenges. So, it's natural that the struggles we see in this generation might look different from those faced by earlier ones. From a psychological and even biological standpoint, I'd say that 20 years of professional observation isn't quite enough to capture massive changes between generations. However, if we shift our view to include the broader social environment, the difference becomes clear. Social context and environmental pressures have evolved dramatically, and those changes are definitely shaping how today's young adults respond to the world around them. One of the clearest indicators of this shift shows up in emotional well-being. While we can talk about various psychological concerns, behavioral issues, relationship difficulties, personality development, the aspect that most obviously stands out today is emotion. And it's hard to ignore. Anxiety, depression, and stress-related disorders are on the rise. Even when depression stems from internal, biological factors, it's still deeply entangled with social conditions. The pressure of unclear expectations, shifting societal standards, and an unpredictable future, it all adds up. That emotional turbulence seems far more pronounced now than in generations past. Back in the day, people were driven by basic, tangible needs. The goal was to put food on the table, find a stable home, have clothes to wear, needs that could be clearly defined and visibly satisfied. You'd know you were doing okay if you weren't hungry at dinner. But for today's young adults, those physical needs have, in many cases, been replaced by abstract ambitions, things like achievement or meaning, which are much harder to pin down. There's a book I came across about emerging adulthood that touches on this really well. It divides people into two broad groups, those striving for stability and those chasing meaning. The first group might say, I want a job, a partner, a home. I want to check the boxes that society defines as successful. The second group is more like, I need to do something I'm passionate about. It has to matter. I want to create value. This second group often gets misunderstood, maybe even dismissed as unrealistic or flighty. But here's the interesting part: when people hit middle age, regardless of which group they started in, they often end up looking for both stability and meaning. So maybe it's not about choosing one path forever, but learning to navigate the tension between both. That's why embracing our current uncertainty could be the first step to answering life's deeper questions, say, about what we value, what gives us purpose. And eventually, those answers still have to make sense in the world we live in, where society decides which contributions are rewarded. It's a balancing act between what we dream and what's sustainable. What's fascinating is that, even when someone seems to have all the traditional signs of success, financial stability, a steady job, maybe a family deep down, they're often still asking themselves, is this really it? Is this the life I want? I've seen so many people, even well into adulthood, suddenly change careers or shift their priorities entirely in search of something more meaningful. Not long ago, I had a pretty heated debate with one of my closest friends. It started out as a regular conversation, but turned into a bit of a clash. The two of us have completely different approaches to life. Like I was saying earlier, one of us is all about finding meaning, and the other one leans more toward building stability. Our disagreement boiled down to this strange friction that happens When someone from the stability camp starts feeling uneasy about their own choices, they might look over at someone who's exploring their passions, taking risks, or chasing fulfillment and think, "Wow, I wish I could do that too." Even if they're not especially passionate people themselves and don't have some grand dream they want to pursue, there's still this restlessness. And honestly, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Each of us has a different set of goals that we've been moving toward ever since we were kids. Problems really begin when people don't know which group they belong to. Maybe they feel lost or confused, or maybe they're comparing themselves to others without realizing they're on totally different paths. That kind of mismatched comparison, especially in the age of social media, can create a lot of unnecessary anxiety. And that comparison game isn't just happening among peers. It also spans across generations. Older folks like our parents often grew up under very different circumstances. There was a kind of urgency to survive. If you didn't work, you didn't eat. So naturally, their mindset was very different from what younger generations are navigating today. But for Gen Z, growing up in a more secure environment means there's room for other questions to surface. It's no longer just about getting by. It's about discovering who you are, what you care about, and how you want to grow. And sometimes, that means questioning the very goals that previous generations took for granted. Sure, earlier generations had rich emotional lives too, but when basic survival was at stake, there wasn't always space to focus on feelings. Now that more of us are physically safe and materially comfortable, the emotional and mental layers have more room to emerge. We're starting to ask, what does success really mean? What kind of life do I actually want to live? And those questions aren't easy. They don't come with clear answers, but they're worth asking. Because the truth is, our emotional world has always been there, right? Just didn't always get the spotlight. Back when survival was more of a daily concern, emotions were often pushed aside. If you were hungry or cold, your brain wasn't exactly prioritizing self-reflection or spiritual growth. But today, with many of those basic needs met, what rises to the surface are questions about identity, connection, and inner peace. We're not being chased by wild animals anymore, but our brains haven't really changed all that much since the Stone Age. Back then, being excluded from the group could literally mean death. That instinct to belong, to feel seen and valued by others, still drives us today. And now, instead of fearing for our physical safety, we fear social disconnection. The feeling of being left behind or not measuring up can hit just as hard as physical danger. That's why, in so many of my recent conversations with people, whether they're my age or even just a few years younger, who keep circling back to the same topics: comparisons with others, anxiety about not knowing when or if we'll succeed, emotional ups and downs, and struggling to manage relationships. It's a loop that keeps repeating, no matter who I talk to. So how do we make sense of all this? Is there a way to categorize these struggles in a way that helps us understand them better? I think there is. Compared to previous generations, where adulthood was largely defined by clear milestones: getting a job, getting married, settling down, today's young adults are working with an expanded playbook. Yes, those traditional goals still exist, but now there's a third element in the mix: emotional self-regulation. In other words, people care more about developing a healthy relationship with their own emotions. And in some cases, career and relationships aren't even the ultimate goals anymore. They are seen more as tools to help with personal growth. So, if we were to roughly break things down, I'd say there are three main areas where people in this stage of life often feel stuck. The first is career questions around purpose, direction, whether your job is a good fit, or if you even want to stay in your field. The second is relationships, not just romantic ones, but friendships, family ties, and social dynamics. Learning what healthy connections look like takes time, and most of us go through some painful breaks before we figure it out. And then there's the third area, the inner world. Mental well-being, emotional stability, intellectual growth. This is where people often feel the most unsure. And if those areas feel off, everything else can seem overwhelming. When your mind isn't at peace, it's hard to find clarity in anything else. But recognizing these three categories can help people realize you're not alone in this. These struggles are more common than we think. Think about it this way: earlier generations were raised with a strong emphasis on doing. You worked hard. You got a job. You supported your family. That was the formula. There wasn't a lot of room to explore your feelings or ask what brought you joy. But things are different now. Young people today are more focused on the question of becoming. Who am I becoming through my work, my relationships, my experiences? And this shift brings a different kind of pressure. Instead of just being measured by your accomplishments, you're also expected to feel fulfilled, passionate, and purposeful. That's a tall order. When career and relationships are no longer the end goals, but the means to self-discovery, it can feel like you're never doing enough. In today's culture, we hear a lot about doing what you love or finding your true calling. Those ideas sound great, but they can also set up unrealistic expectations. Not everyone has one clear passion, and not every job needs to be a lifelong mission. Still, the desire to grow and feel aligned with your deeper values is real, and that's a significant development in how we define adulthood now. So, in navigating adulthood, these three domains, career, relationships, and inner development, are more intertwined than ever. You can't really separate them. If your job is draining you emotionally, it'll spill into your relationships. If your relationships are full of conflict, it can cloud your ability to think clearly at work. And if your internal world feels chaotic, both your work and social life will take a hit. This is where emotional regulation really matters. Learning how to manage your thoughts and feelings doesn't just help you feel better, it also gives you the clarity to make better choices in every part of life. And yet, this kind of emotional literacy isn't something most of us were taught. We have to figure it out as we go, often through trial and error. What's hopeful, though, is that more people are talking about it now. Therapy isn't as stigmatized. Mental health resources are more available. There's a growing awareness that success isn't just about external achievements, it's also about how well you understand yourself and connect with others. And maybe that's the most important shift of all. Adulthood isn't a one-size-fits-all journey anymore. It's becoming a more flexible, personal path. That flexibility can feel scary. It lacks clear roadmaps, but it also opens the door for deeper fulfillment. It lets people define success in their own terms, not just based on what previous generations expected of them. Still, that freedom comes with its own set of challenges. When you're no longer following a clear script, you have to write your own, and that can be overwhelming. It's easy to get caught in comparison loops, especially online. You scroll through social media, and it feels like everyone else has it figured out: better jobs, healthier relationships, more exciting lives. But that's rarely the full picture. The problem isn't just comparison itself, it's the kind of comparison. People often don't even realize what they're comparing. One person might be chasing stability, another meaning. When they look at each other, they see something they think they lack, without recognizing they're playing different games entirely. This confusion is amplified by the way older generations often interact with younger ones. Parents might say things like, "Back in my day," We had to work just to eat. Or I didn't complain, he just did what needed to be done. And while that may have been true in their time, it doesn't always help today's challenges. That kind of narrative can feel invalidating because it misses the point. Young people today are facing a different kind of stress. It's not the stress of physical survival, but emotional survival. It's about finding connection, identity, and peace in a world that moves fast and demands a lot. Just because the danger isn't tangible doesn't mean it isn't real. Today's struggles are less about hunger and more about belonging. And the brain treats that threat of exclusion, of not fitting in, of not living up as seriously as it once treated the threat of a predator. That's why modern stress can feel just as intense, even if we're materially comfortable. All of this explains why so many conversations today, especially among Gen Z, circle back to the same themes: comparison, uncertainty, emotional overwhelm, and relationship challenges. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of change. And naming these issues helps take away the shame. We're in a moment where emotional development isn't just a luxury, it's becoming a core part of what it means to grow up. Learning to manage our emotions, build meaningful connections, and find a direction that feels authentic isn't extra, it's essential. And maybe the real takeaway is this: no matter how different our paths look on the outside, we're all wrestling with similar questions underneath. What kind of life feels worth living? How do we stay connected to ourselves and to others? And how can we keep growing in a world that keeps shifting around us? That's the challenge of modern adulthood. And it's also its opportunity.